Okay, that music has nothing to do with the topic of this lecture, but I thought that you guys could actually do with being exposed to some decent tunes for once. So that was 8 Mile High by Husker Du. You're welcome. Okay, so this lecture actually shouldn't take too long. There's only 24 slides in this presentation. YouTube and social television. I know there's a couple of people who are looking at YouTube for their assignments, so this one is important. In the context of the module as a whole, there's another lecture on virtual reality and social media. I'm going to scrub that one. Nobody's looking at that for their projects, and it's more of an interactive thing anyway, so without you guys being able to do the virtual reality stuff, it's not going to make a huge amount of sense, and it's not going to make a massive amount of sense being broadcast over this medium, which will leave one more lecture to be done, which is the final lecture of the module, which is quite important because there's stuff in there that I want you to reflect on for assignment 2. So I called that social media futures. I'm actually going to strip it down a little bit and get right into the important stuff when I do that lecture. So it's going to be a pared down version because there's some stuff at the beginning which isn't as important, but there's some really important stuff at the end of that lecture. So I'm going to concentrate on that. But anyway, I'm going to get into this now. YouTube and social television. You know, it doesn't. The irony is not lost on me that you're watching this via YouTube. That you're subscribing to my channel or you're clicking on the link that I'm sending you. So this is so meta. This is just totally meta at this point. It's like, a Spike Jonze movie. It's really, really meta. Really the lecture outline for today. Why does YouTube matter? How do we experience social television? And how are video sharing platforms changing today's screen industries? Those are the important points. I will talk a little bit about the rise of TikTok in this, although I haven't specifically gone into it too much. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, because there's been very little academic work done on TikTok. Minuscule amounts. We're just seeing like the first work that's coming out on it. And because of that, the first work invariably in a topic is not the best work either. That's not a slight really on the people who are doing that work. It's more of an acknowledgement and recognition that the academic work on TikTok is very immature at this point in time. So I'll talk a bit about TikTok in the context of YouTube and how it differentiates from YouTube and why it's got traction with certain users and YouTube perhaps doesn't satisfy the aims of those users as well. So why does YouTube matter? I'm sure, nice little infographic for you here. 1 billion monthly active users. YouTube as a country would be the 3rd most populated in the world behind China and India. It's not just an American thing. 80% of views are outside the US. On average, user spends 40 minutes on YouTube on their mobile device every day. 4 million plus videos viewed every day, 6 billion hours videos watched every month, etc, etc, etc. So it's a crazy amount of content that goes on to YouTube. There's a crazy reach with YouTube. YouTube has replaced traditional television in terms of viewing habits for a great number of people. And it's massive, basically. And if I wasn't to talk about YouTube in this module, then I'd be doing you a great disservice. And let it be never said that I disserve you as students. I am all about customer service. So the importance of YouTube. Obviously, it's a platform for the sharing of user-generated content. Not all content on YouTube is user-generated. We should note that. A lot of the prime content on YouTube is actually material which is copyrighted and which is shared. So we're familiar with looking at music videos on YouTube, for example. But the vast majority of content which is put on YouTube is generated by users. It's again an instance of very often sharing the self and self-presentation. So we can go back to Irving Goffman's ideas about the presentation of self on that. It's a platform that creates content to be shared across other networks as well. And that's a very important function of YouTube. YouTube sits as a service which can be used on other services. You can embed YouTube videos anywhere. You can embed content that you create on YouTube in any place. You can share content that you find on YouTube across different networks too. So YouTube's versatility in that sense makes it extremely important. It's a platform that's used by major corporations, as I alluded to. You know, music companies will use it. You know, television companies will use YouTube. BBC uses YouTube. You know, so other companies have become part of YouTube's business model. Most importantly, of course, it's a platform owned by Google. And so the entire sort of critique that I've been building in this module about surveillance capitalism, the generation and sharing of and profiling of people through their data practices, Google, masterful at this, their purchase of YouTube, critically important in how they've realized their business model around data harvesting. So the Google effect, as I call it here, Google's model of operation can be argued to be constant real-time biopolitical exploitation. Biopolitics, a concept associated with the man in the photo, Michel Foucault. This biopolitical exploitation is basically all our activity is harvested by Google in a continual stream in order to improve its business model. So Hart and Negri in their classic work Empire talk about the contemporary capitalism, which Google is a foundational part, is based on a form of what we call Foucauldian biopower. The ability to create different types of subject through the exercise of power. And what Google does effectively is create data subjects. We recreate us not as individuals, not as human beings in the sense that we are, although we're still human beings, but Google boils us down to a certain set of essentials, one of which is sort of this biopower, this data subject and data subjectivity. So Google's vision of human beings and Google's vision of the world in total is one where the world is completely knowable, controllable and predictable thanks to the data that is produced on us. Google are proponents of what Evgeny Morisov calls technological solutionism, the idea that if you have enough technology, you have enough data, you have enough information on people, you can make predictions about their behavior and you can understand them in a way that makes them predictable and therefore safer to deal with as consumers. Solutionism is basically a way of recasting all complex social situations as neatly defined problems with definite solutions, or transparent and self-evident processes that can be easily optimized as long as the right algorithms in place. And I've been coming back to algorithms week after week now in the last few weeks, and YouTube's algorithms are very, very sophisticated, not just in directing us to what sort of content we might want to see, but also algorithmically using our data in terms of processing of us as data subjects. Now, Evgeny Morisov argues that this kind of solutionism is typical ideology of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and intellectuals who glorify digital media as being the solution to all societal problems. Basically, we're positioning YouTube here as part of a vast network of data harvesting tools that are being used to improve society along the metrics that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs believe are important. So technological solutionism reimagines the individual and the social as part of the algorithms of digital media, and therefore any problems arising at individual or social level can be solved by these digital media. Irony is not lost on me today as I'm sitting at home in isolation, when a virus comes along, this whole thing breaks down. Google will be seen, though, according to this view and according to the view of Christian Fuchs, as a controlling machine that aims at controlling people's perception of reality and at transforming those perceptions into profits. And YouTube is absolutely critical to that vision. So in terms of social television and us as people, we are in a prosumer position. We are the consumer of TV and the producer of TV in this model, and our comments mediate and alter the meaning of social TV texts. So this echoes John Fisk on audiencing, and if you remember the lecture I did last year on audiences with you, and you've also done one on MS-232 as well. But Fisk's idea is that the audience transforms the meaning of a text through its activity. He calls this audiencing. He turns audience into a verb to understand this. And really, in terms of social TV, we are a part of this. And we are deliberately a part of this because companies like Google and in their design of YouTube want us to be a data contributor to the content that is on there because this improves their business model. So, I mean, we should be at this stage, you should all be familiar with the ideas of Stuart Hall on audience. I mean, Hall's idea of the active audience and encoding and decoding text can tell us much about the nature of watching social TV. So importantly can William Merrin's notion of the hyperactive audience. And again, if you want to go back to the hyperactive audience, look back over your notes from last year's lecture, or pick up a copy of William's book, Media Studies 2.0, where he talks about the hyperactive audience. And YouTube's a very interesting example of a this kind of superactive, hyperactive audience where we're watching content, we're commenting on content, we're sharing content all at the same time. We're even producing content. So, we are a fully engaged media production unit in this wider ecostructure of media. And as an audience in this, we're challenged to select and understand YouTube and the context in which YouTube work exists in particular. Basically, the linear model of communication, this is Shannon and Weaver, brutal distillation of Shannon and Weaver's model of communication, where you have a sender, medium, and receiver. We should know already by now that Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding model of meaning transmission means there's lots of factors that shape both ends of the communication process in terms of encoding and decoding. And what I guess we have in terms of a hyperactive audience is a feedback loop here. The decoding at one side leads to encoding. As we decode messages, we are providing our own messages in terms of comments, in terms of likes, in terms of sharing, or we're producing complementary text to this on the YouTube platform or on other video sharing platforms like TikTok, for example, which continues this cycle of encoding and decoding of messages. And it's all user generated. Well, a lot of it is user generated. So, if you like, the two loops here, the two ends of the transmission model have been closed up in terms of how things work with regards to the hyperactive audience. So, should also remember from Stuart Hall's encoding and decoding model of meaning transmission that there are three potential readings that we can have of a text, according to Hall. A preferred reading, which affirms the hegemonic order. Basically, we agree. Oppositional reading, which challenges the hegemonic order. We disagree. And a negotiated reading, which is a mix of these 2 points. And I went over this in some detail last. In terms of the hegemonic order, what Gramsci is a figure you should be very familiar with now, I hope. But hegemony, the exercise of cultural and social leadership by a dominant group via persuasion and appeal to common sense rather than force. One question we can ask ourselves is, does YouTube content challenge or reinforce hegemony? This is a very complex question. The vast majority of content on YouTube may not be produced with a notion of hegemonic challenge or hegemonic orthodoxy in mind, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't work to do this. And I think if we think critically about YouTube content and how we engage with it in terms of hegemony, do we seek out things which challenge the status quo, or do we follow trends which are a reaffirmation of the hegemonic order? Then we can really critically get into our YouTube practices. What kind of YouTube user are we? Are we a critical YouTube user, or are we a very blunt and naive, if you like, YouTube user, and we're not particularly interested in challenging hegemonic orders? These are very, very important questions. And indeed, you can apply this to any area of social media that you're looking at. Does your social media content and the social media content that you consume as a user, does that just reaffirm the hegemonic order of things, or is it genuinely challenging to a hegemonic order? That's a very, very important question that you can ask yourself with regards to your project and indeed to your essay. And of course, I've come to Will's stuff here on these slides. What we really need to question is, in the age of social TV and YouTube, do we watch? Watching is a deliberate activity. We are engaged in watching. We are focused in it. Do we even watch anymore? Hard to say. We check, we surf, we post, we comment, we message, we make. This is a hyperactive audience, not just an active audience. So we can refer to William's work from his book Media Studies 2.0 and his notion of media as media which is focused on the self and is created by the self and reflects the self in different ways. So what does Will actually get into this? Will's argument really boils down to the mass audiences, including both simple and active audiences, have given way to what we call diffuse audiences. And a diffuse audience is one which has niche interests. We no longer consume massive amounts of television and all the same type of television. Ironically, this morning I sat down and did a lecture for MS-120 on television. You're welcome to watch it. It's up on the YouTube channel. This might fill in some of the gaps here if you can't remember this stuff from last year. But really, television in the 20th century was the age of the mass audience. And what Will's argument is in Media Studies 2.0 is that now we've got a very low concentration audience effect going on. Basically, we are diffused. We are all consuming different content based on our own needs and uses. You could even use uses and gratifications as a term here to describe it, but I don't want to muddy the water too much with that. And obviously the technology we use plays a critical role in that transformation. The fact that we use YouTube allows us to be a diffuse audience. We have moved from media to media, basically. Now we tailor our tools in order to receive the messages that we want and the content that we want, and we are in control of that content, that content collection. However, our control is of course conditioned by the platform YouTube and by the algorithms at play on YouTube as well. So it would be naive to say control here refers to we control everything about our experience. We control perhaps when we see and the kind of stuff that we do see through our habits, but YouTube is pushing content at us all the time. So the experience of social TV then is very much guided by network principles. YouTube, like I just said, pushes up content which receives support from other users. Now, this is only partially true and ignores the fact that large corporate media companies' content is very popular because they have resource advantages in attaining recognition and attention over everyday users. The bigger you are on YouTube, the more likely you are to be seen, in effect. So the network isn't flat in this sense. It's much more hierarchical than that. And the big companies can dominate attention in this kind of network effect that we see on YouTube. So transnational media corporations, the organized exploiters of surplus value generating labor, control YouTube's political attention economy, according to Christian Fuchs. So entertainment and music are obviously very, very important on YouTube and very, very popular. It's not just the YouTuber. They're very marginal, but only a very few make big money out of it. In fact, the vast majority of content and the vast majority of profit made on YouTube is still in the hands of big entertainment companies. So Fuchs is really, really critical of this notion of YouTube being revolutionary in some way. Christian Fuchs basically sees YouTube as an extension of traditional media forms. Yes, it's very different, and yes, it does allow for user-generated content, but the big players, according to Fuchs, and the people who are making the big money are the traditional media companies. Yeah, sorry about that. I just tried to play a video through the video and basically it paused my presentation for me. Thank God for that, because I haven't lost the rest of the presentation. So that jerky bit here, technical gremlins. This is actually, I mean, you can download the PowerPoint from Blackboard, right? And you can watch this video. It's embedded in the PowerPoint presentation on Blackboard. So do have a look. It's got a guy, YouTuber, talking about his content and what he does and so on. Now, one of the most, obviously, you know, I can't get away from Henry Jenkins when I'm discussing YouTube. Excuse me. Henry Jenkins argues that YouTube is a site for the production and distribution of grassroots media, and that on YouTube, participation occurs at 3 distinct levels: production, selection, and distribution. So Jenkins' idea here, again, is, I think, overly optimistic. We have to take into account some of the criticisms that Christian Fuchs makes and this idea of challenging the hegemonic order of things. Jenkins takes a kind of alternative approach that YouTube is all about grassroots media, and that kind of ignores the importance of major media companies in YouTube content. Yeah, sorry about this. Every time I skip forward, it's kicking me out of the recording every time. So this is going to be really, really stunted at this point, which is unfortunate. YouTube is owned by Google, and the revenues that are accumulated with online advertising on YouTube do not belong to the immediate content producers, but to the shareholders of Google. Obviously, there's a stipend paid out to major important people on YouTube. So, you know, people can get wealthy on YouTube, but the vast majority of people who produce content on YouTube do not get anything from it. So Jenkins really neglects ownership as a central aspect of the participatory culture in YouTube. Most popular YouTube videos stem from global multimedia corporations such as Universal, Sony, and Walt Disney. They're not sharing content, they're not sharing profits with anyone, and indeed the vast majority of us who post things onto YouTube get none of the money that Google gets in terms of revenue from YouTube. Nobody is going to pay me for this stuff that I'm putting up on YouTube, basically. And I'm sick and tired of it, and I want my checks, but I'm not going to get any because I'm small fry and I'm only being watched by a bunch of Swansea University students, which is sad times because, I mean, you've got to admit, this is superb content. So Jenkins, unfortunately, is wrong again. Poor Henry Jenkins. Politics on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook are possible, but there are minority issues. The predominant focus of users is on non-political engagement. Jenkins' idea that this is about grassroots media is all about empowering people to actually produce critical content. If you like, he takes the Stuart Hall idea that, and this idea of oppositional readings, and we can challenge the hegemonic order of things by producing our own media. He takes it to the nth degree, and he says, yeah, well, that's what people are going to be doing if they make their own content. Actually, the vast majority of content on YouTube does nothing of the sort. Web 2.0 corporations and the usage they enable are not an expression of participatory democracy. As long as corporations do this, they will make sure that doesn't happen, in fact. YouTube, and by extension Google, and the way they control content on YouTube is to promote material which brings in revenue to them. The political aspect of that content is completely unimportant. It's not a consideration for those companies whatsoever. So Jenkins' notion that actually we can critically engage with society as a large through YouTube, well, let me just boil that down. Yes, we can, but the vast majority of content on YouTube does not bear that out. We do not use it for those reasons. We use it as another extension of an entertainment medium. So, as a platform, YouTube has meant that existing content providers have had to adjust their platform. So Radio 1 and YouTube, for example, I've got, that's an image taken from one of Radio 1's videos. That's Rachel Riley from Countdown, right? And actually, the BBC and through the extension, through the Radio 1's usage, have identified YouTube as actually a critical platform for distribution of content. So YouTube has transformed the game for traditional broadcasters, and maybe that's its most important aspect. It's not, broadcasting ourselves, it's we're getting content that we would have had in different ways in the past through the platform of YouTube. So the DIY aesthetic of YouTube basically is a myth. There's little amateur content about, and very little amateur, genuinely popular material on YouTube. I'm sorry, I've phrased that bullet point really, really poorly. Let me just kind of break it down here. There is very little amateur in nature about genuinely popular material on YouTube. Actually, the genuinely popular material is very much produced with high production values and a considerable amount of money going into that kind of production. In which case, we should really be highly critical of YouTube as a platform that says that we can generate user-generated content on it, and it's a social platform in that way. Actually, the vast majority of usage here is content that we would have had previously through television and which we are now receiving through a different medium altogether, YouTube. It's another distribution platform for the giant companies out there, and it's owned by an even bigger giant company. And so in conclusion, YouTube as a form of social media is very, very contentious because most of the content on there is not socially media driven at all. The ability to produce as part of participatory culture sits in tension with the corporate ownership of the platform, and the use of YouTube is most pronounced on us as an audience and as limited producers. Now, let me just flip that for a while. So that's the last slide in the presentation. I've done this in 25 minutes. Wow, rattle through that stuff. Let me just reflect for a short while on TikTok then. TikTok is far more about user-generated content. In fact, most of the content on TikTok, you would say, is user-generated, or at very worst, the content that isn't is remixed by users in particular ways. Obviously, TikTok is exploding at the moment in terms of usage, and it's interesting to reflect why. Some of the reasons why might be that the algorithms are actually better suited towards individual users compared to YouTube's algorithms, which privilege large organizations and large companies and their content. That's a very important point. But the TikTok video is very, very different in form, and we've seen this kind of video app before. We saw it with Vine, which was a Twitter-based app. We see it at the moment with Byte, which is sort of competing with TikTok in the same space. TikTok videos are short, and they're best thought of, I think, as video memes. And the huge amount of content on TikTok is the replication of memes by users. In which sense that operates in a very different space in terms of user-generated content and audience experience compared to YouTube. We don't just use YouTube for meme-based material. There is a lot of it out there, and TikTok's probably actually a better platform for that stuff. But the breadth of content on YouTube means it's a far different animal to TikTok. The rise of TikTok is really, really interesting, I think there's no question, and it's much more of a social networking app, I think, than YouTube actually is. It's, you know, it has networking features on it. It copies some of the elements of networking that we see in other apps like Instagram, like Twitter, like Facebook. But TikTok is far more about short, zeitgeisty pieces that people mimic other performance within in order to share with friends and across the network. It doesn't serve, you can do that on YouTube, but YouTube also serves different purposes altogether, like putting lectures up online for students who can't come into university because we have a devastating virus going on around us at this point in time. So when we reflect on TikTok, it's interesting. I think TikTok is much more user-focused. Firstly, I think TikTok has a design and function which is far more user-focused than YouTube actually is. And that's an odd thing to say, because YouTube's interface is absolutely lovely, but TikTok is far more streamlined, but it's for particular usage only. TikTok, it is social television, but it's social television of a brutally short kind, and I'd like that idea that it's a meme generator for video content. That's the kind of material that we're seeing on TikTok generally. I mean, Instagram also, I mean, we can consider Instagram as this kind of televisual app as well. You know, you can share video on Instagram. Again, it serves a very, very different function and purpose than YouTube, especially due to the fact that, you know, that material is shared with a defined network along Facebook's rules of, you know, you must be friends with people for them to see your content. So, or you know, you can follow if you hashtag it, I suppose, but there's certainly different functions within that as well. YouTube is the, you know, the big beast of social television. It's difficult at times to reconcile what social television happens on YouTube with the giant sort of corporations that dominate the form. These other forms of social television don't have the same network effect as YouTube in terms of content generation, but we are increasingly using our own televisual form to communicate via social media. Maybe actually, when we reflect on this, YouTube actually serves a partial social function for us, and it's up to the individual who's using YouTube to choose that social function. Okay, that's about all I've got to say on YouTube. Obviously, hit me up in the comments if you've got any questions or queries about anything, or email me, or get in touch and we'll organise a Skype session around this. One more lecture left on this module for me to do. I might even dive into it right now while this video processes. This basically, my sort of one of my intellectual heroes is the Jaron Lanier lecture coming up. But obviously, if you've got any questions about YouTube, anything like that, please give me a shout. Thanks, guys.